Hi there, Year 12. So this is your lesson for Tuesday, when I'm not available to take the lessons. So the idea being simply watch this video, pause it when there's tasks for you to do, and complete the work in your book just like you would normally. But it just means we're not going to fall behind at all. So we'll begin with a retrieval like we always do. Now, I haven't included the answers in this video or with the PowerPoint because that seemed a bit silly. But I still do want you to have a go at the retrieval because we know how important it is to recall our knowledge. And then you can always check your knowledge using your notes and your knowledge organizer topic companions afterwards. So have a go at those 6 questions, thinking about what we've done so far on our definitions of abnormality, and pause the video. Okay, so one of those retrieval questions, asked us what it means to deviate. And we've been saying, haven't we, in lesson, it means to sort of stray away or to differ from. So far we've looked at our deviation from social norms definition. If you differ from, you sort of move away from what is considered normal and those socially accepted norms of behaviour, codes of behaviour, you must be abnormal, you must have a problem, a mental problem. We've thought about the definition of statistical infrequency. If you're rare or uncommon statistically, then that would identify that there's an abnormality, that there's a problem. And we've also thought about this idea of failure to function adequately. So we've got to have a way of assessing and working out whether somebody is adequately functioning in life, whether they are able to maintain those everyday tasks and relationships. And if they're failing to do that, then they have an abnormality. And we know that psychiatrists rely on the GAF scale to make that assessment. So far we've done 3 of our 4 definitions. And what you can see on the screen there is your knowledge organizer, which sets them all out. And you've all got copies of that. And I think if it were me for today's lesson, I would want to have that in front of me as a reference point as well as having the topic companion for more detailed notes. So the final one, the 4th and final definition that we're going to be looking at today is deviation. So there's that word again, deviate or differ from. Deviation from ideal mental health. And it basically says, well, if this is what an ideally mentally healthy person looks like, the characteristics that they have or the criteria that they have to be mentally healthy, if somebody differs from that or deviates from that on any of the criteria, then they must have an abnormality. So the first step in identifying whether somebody is abnormal or not is understanding what a mentally healthy person looks like. So then we can try and understand whether somebody differs from it. So it very much uses what we call a medical model. Because if you think about it, if you go to the doctors, for a physical problem, what the doctor has in mind is what healthy looks like for all the different characteristics and criteria. So for example, they know that a healthy resting heart rate is between 60 and 100 beats per minute. They know that a healthy body temperature is 37.5, and they know what a healthy blood pressure is. They know if they took blood tests what a healthy white blood count would be. They've got their criteria of what healthy looks like, and when you go to the doctors with symptoms, they will do these assessments, do these measurements, take blood, a urine sample, take your temperature, take your blood pressure reading, and then if any of them differs from that idea that they have of what healthy is, then they'll say, oh yes, you are very feverish, you have got an exceptionally high temperature, you differ from what healthy is. So now let's dig a bit deeper and think what's causing the fever, what's causing the high temperature, and so on. So we start by identifying what healthy looks like, and then we say what somebody who deviates from that they're unhealthy, and let's try and find out what and why. Well, this final definition for psychopathology, for mental illness, tries to do exactly the same. But instead of thinking about our body temperature or our heart rate, it thinks about criteria or characteristics of what it means to be mentally healthy. And somebody called Marie Jahoda is a key name for this one, came up with the criteria. And again, this is on that knowledge organizer. But as you can see at the bottom of the slide there, Marie Jahoda is the person who identified these 6 criteria for what she considered to be ideal mental health. And if anybody deviates from any one of these, you don't have to deviate from all 6. If you deviate from any one of these, then you must have some sort of psychopathology. So the 6 that she identified: an accurate perception of reality. So knowing what's real, knowing what's imaginary. So most of us have that. But if I were to be having hallucinations, seeing things that weren't actually there, hearing voices, or being really paranoid and believing that somebody wants to kill me or I'm being spied on, then I haven't got an accurate perception of reality. So I deviate from it. A positive attitude towards yourself, so a good positive self-esteem. I'm going to come back to the self-actualization idea. Resistance to stress. Now, I want to make it really clear, this does not mean you never ever get stressed, because in life there are stressors, there are stressful events. It would be silly to suggest otherwise. Jahoda wasn't suggesting otherwise, but what she was saying is if you're mentally healthy, when stressful things come along, you've got a resistance to them. You can cope with them. You might have a bad day. You might fall out with somebody. You might find yourself just going, I just need to go to bed. I've had enough of today. But the next day you wake up and you get on with it. And you're resistant to it. You've got a bit of a resilience. You don't let it then spiral out of control so that you go into a state of depression, for example. Okay, so resistance to stress. Autonomy, which means being able to make decisions for yourself. If you're autonomous, you're in charge of yourself, you make decisions. Environmental mastery. Now that sounds a bit ambitious, really. Being the master of your environment. Well, all it really means is being able to regulate your mood, your emotions and your behaviours depending on the environment you're in. So, for example, if I have environmental mastery, I know that the way I dress, the way I speak, the way I conduct myself in the workplace needs to be different than how I might speak or dress or behave if I were on a night out with friends. Okay? It actually is about just regulating your emotions, your behaviours, and all of these other things depending on the environment. Most of us do that. We might not consider ourselves to be masters of the environment, but we do that. Somebody who has an abnormality, certain types of psychopathology, certain illnesses, will not be able to do that. So let's come back to this self-actualization, because we've heard this word before. We came across this word when we looked at the humanistic approach. It was at the top of our hierarchy, wasn't it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Self-actualization was the ultimate goal of what we hope to achieve. Now, Jahoda is saying here, that's one of the criteria for being mentally healthy. And if we go back to what Maslow said it was, he said it was being being fulfilled as a human. It was reaching your full potential as a human being. And all of those other layers had to be in place before you could get to that point. And there's the first, I would say, the first criticism, the first evaluation point of this definition, because here we are, we're saying if somebody differs from this, then they have a psychopathology. But yet, self-actualization, that's really aspirational. In fact, we said at the time it's quite unrealistic, because when Maslow was coming up with the idea, what he actually had in mind was somebody like Einstein, somebody who was ultra highly functioning, looked up to by people, like on a different level. So actually, we have to think carefully about whether this is realistic. Otherwise, we're going to be diagnosing everybody, aren't we, as deviating from ideal mental health. So essentially, in terms of how the definition works, that's it. It identifies what somebody who's mentally healthy looks like, not physically looks like, but in terms of characteristics and criteria. And we need to remember Jahoda's name. And then it identifies that if you deviate from any of those, you have a psychopathology. So in terms of what I'd like you to do with all this information to help you get your head around it. The first thing I think would be helpful is for everybody to update this sheet. So if you remember, I think it was our first or second lesson on this new topic, I gave you all this sheet, and so far we've only filled in the top 2. Now would be a sensible time to go back to it and update it and fill in for failure to function adequately and deviation from ideal mental health, just with a very brief explanation, that trigger or cue word, and as the lesson goes on, some evaluation points too, because we're going to be using our topic companions. Okay, so pause the video, spend 5 minutes or so just updating your sheet. Sorry, I'm going to skip over some of these slides. But what we are going to do now is think about a more extended question. Okay, now I'm not going to ask you to write this as an essay, but I am going to ask you to plan it. And you're only going to be able to plan it if you have your topic companions available so that you've got those additional notes. You could use Masslit, remember, we've all got a Masslit login, and there's a section with lots of little video explanations that you might add to your understanding. And we can use our knowledge organisers. So what we've got at the top here is we've got a 16-mark question. Failure to function adequately and deviation from ideal mental health are 2 ways of defining abnormality. So they're just telling us the 2 they want us to think about and focus on. Describe and evaluate these 2 definitions. Remember, evaluation is strengths as well as weaknesses. So they're setting it out really clearly for us what we've got to do. We know there's 6 marks for knowledge and 10 marks for evaluation. So what you can see here, and I'll share this PowerPoint with you as well on class charts, you can see how we might go about planning or thinking about the structure. Our knowledge is going to be the knowledge of the definition, how it works, what the letters stand for, just some examples of how this definition might be applied. Now we're going to get 6 marks in total, and we've got 2 definitions to talk about. So we're going to get 3 marks for talking about the failure to function adequately, how that works, mentioning the GAF scale, and 3 marks for the deviation from ideal mental health, Jehoda's criteria, medical model. And we're going to turn that, or at least we're going to plan how we would turn that into 2 P paragraphs, making a point, explaining it, using examples. But of course, the bulk of our marks are for the evaluate bit. So we know that strengths and limitations. Again, we've got 2 definitions to talk about. So if there's 10 marks up for grabs in total for evaluation, and we've got 2 different definitions, we're aiming to get 5 marks on both. Now, what I'm suggesting in terms of our plan is that we plan in total 4 evaluation paragraphs. 2 for the failure to function adequately, and 2 for the deviation from ideal mental health. So we need to use our topic companions, we need to look at the evaluation points, we need to think, right, okay, if it says, for example, that the deviation from ideal mental health has a problem of being culturally relative, because Jehoda's criteria are actually based on a Western view of what it means to be mentally healthy. And, you know, we can't apply that to other cultures fairly or rightly. Then I think, right, there's my point. There's my evaluation point, that Jehoda's criteria are culturally relative, P. Then I explain what I mean by that. What do I mean by culturally relative? In what way are Jehoda's criteria culturally relative? For example, autonomy in some cultures isn't important. It's not seen to be important to make your own decisions in some cultures. So I use my examples to fully explain and develop my answer. And then my L, I have to link back. Link back, it's asking me to describe and evaluate this definition. So I'm linking back and I'm saying, so therefore, is it useful? Is this definition useful if it can only be applied in some cultures? If it's ethnocentric? I want to try and pack in my key terminology. Okay, and the topic companion knowledge organizer will help you. So that is your task. Now it is a plan I am asking for, not an essay, but it's a detailed plan. Okay, so it's what's my point going to be as a bullet point, but then it's what evidence would I use? What examples would I use? So we're going to essentially end up with the bare bones of an essay. Okay, that's what I'd like you to spend the lesson doing. So that's pretty much, you can end the video here and just use your topic companions and do that for me in your books. Hopefully you've got everything you need, and then we can pick it up together on Thursday, because I'll be back in lessons as normal then. Okay, if you do need anything, drop me an email. Okay, thanks very much.